Welcome to the News9 Plus show on the world's first news and current affairs OTT platform, News9 Plus. The Gaza hospital horror. We're still on the horrific attack on the hospital in Gaza City. I have with me today Arjun Hardas, the India representative of the American Jewish Committee, and Dr. Manjari Singh, Assistant Professor, Amity Institute of International Studies. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
There's a lot of international outrage at what happened, Arjun, at the hospital in Gaza. What's your take on this? Who's behind this?
Well, the horror should be pretty clear. That's for everybody. There is no question about it. How many civilians have died? This is not a question of semantics. Of the number would be 300, 500. Eventually, the numbers will come out, whatever the final numbers. So nobody should squabble over the numbers. What should be done is find out what caused this in the first place. Now, unfortunately, there are no foreign correspondents left in Gaza City, in Gaza, in the entire strip, not just the city. So the sources are purely Hamas sources, which, to be understood, has to be taken with a pinch of salt. There is even footage from an Arab TV channel which shows a rocket firing which sort of exploded in midair, fired by the Hamas, and which has seen to have been falling on the hospital.
That's what the Israeli government has said.
That's what the Israeli government has said. The Israeli
rocket fell on
government
the
also
hospital.
said that there were no, at that particular point, there were no air flights going on there, no attacks at that particular time of the flight. That can be easily checked. That's not something that can be hidden. So, but the horror of it cannot be hidden. Now, the people are, at the end of the day, the ordinary people are stuck in the middle of this. Whichever side you can take on that. As horrible it was 11 days ago on the 7th of October, equal horror is there for the civilians who are getting killed.
Do you think that this outrageous attack, I mean, as horrible as it is, it's kind of deflected the entire issue that we were talking about in the last couple of days, which is about the October 7th violence and the possibility of an Israeli ground invasion? The subject seems to have completely switched.
This is expected. This happens in the course of actions. As soon as something else happens, like for example, 27 years ago, approximately in 1996, when Shimon Peres was the prime minister after the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, there was the Hezbollah had started a sort of an artillery rocket firing, and in return, the Israeli army was firing artillery shells into southern Lebanon. And there was an unfortunate incident which has been evidently now proven that it was an Israeli artillery attack which caused this. There was a shelter where southern Lebanese citizens, ordinary citizens, had taken shelter. And about a direct shell hit that shelter from the Israeli army side, and about 108 civilians were killed in that. Unfortunately, I don't want to sound cynical about this. I mean, having covered all this even during my days as a journalist as well, but casualties of war should not be made into just use the phrase collateral damage. That the humanity cannot be ignored.
Was it ever traced, the origin of that shell, and who fired it and who gave the order for it?
There was a report, but then it's not very clear. But the shelling it's pretty, because the Hezbollah doesn't have artillery guns.
Of course.
And the attack was in daylight. So there was the shelling was being done by the Israelis, no doubt about it. Israelis have admitted possible clause for it. I don't think they've actually ever said that they've done it or anything like that. But the point is, this happens in war. But that's no excuse to let it happen all the time.
Dr. Manjari, the timing of this attack, you're looking at this literally a few hours before President Biden is landing in Israel. I mean, as horrific as it is, no one can, condone an attack of this nature. And I think it's been universally condemned. An attack on a hospital is probably the worst form of a terror attack, if you can call it that. But the timing of the attack, I mean, who benefits from this?
Definitely Hamas, if I have to put it very shortly. Because, we are living in a time of non-state actors offensive, right? And what do non-state actors gain out of these, offensives? What they aim for? They aim for more visibility. They may aim for more noises, more attention. And like you said, that the timing is very crucial to keep in mind, because this is the time when Biden is visiting Middle East, right? So the world will be looking at Biden. What is he going to talk about? What is he going to say in terms of whatever has happened in the Gaza hospital, right? So all of this narrative building, it causes narrative building, right? So it helps Hamas in a way to sort of, do whatever it is doing in the in this entire offensive.
Right.
So I think that is what it is. If you have to ask who is gaining out of it, it is certainly Hamas, because why would Israel do something like this
Right.
and not take claim for it? They have clearly said that this is not their bomb, it is not their missile, it is a misfired missile from the Gazan side itself.
Right. In fact,
Right.
we want to play the Israeli ambassador to India's bite on this, where he's strongly denied the fact that Israel had anything to do with this attack. Let's listen in.
Al Ahli hospital was hit by a rocket of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. From the beginning of the fighting, more than 450 rockets, Palestinian shot rockets, fell inside the Gaza Strip. They tried to hit our children, but on the way, hit their own children. The international poison machine immediately accuses Israel. It's really a pity that many around the world are cooperating with them. But in our technological world, everything is documented, and we have clear-cut evidence that it was a Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket. The Palestinian terrorists and their allies immediately take out the victim card. After cowardly murdering, abducting, and abusing defenseless Israeli citizens, they are afraid to confront the IDF. They are trying to create international pressure to prevent us from taking action. But nothing will prevent us from making sure that these murderers will not be able to repeat their atrocities. Release the kidnapped. Stop hiding behind your own civilian population. Come out of the tunnels and fight us.
So, Arjun, now, until recently we were talking about October 7th, and now this battle of narratives is unfolded. Do you think the attention, world attention, in fact, has now moved to this horrific attack on the hospital in Gaza?
That's pretty clear. As Dr. Manjari said, the terrorist groups want to bring attention to themselves.
Right.
If you, as a senior journalist yourself, you recall, just on the eve of President Clinton's visit to India,
Yeah.
you had that massacre in Chhattisgarh,
Right.
in which 26 civilians were killed. Who did it? It was the terrorists again.
Right.
Lashkar, Jaish-e-Mohammed,
Yeah,
Lashkar,
yeah.
one of them. I don't
To
know.
draw attention to
draw
the,
attention to them.
to Kashmir.
To Kashmir. So that was the thing, that it's not a safe area. Things are not there.
Right. Right.
So yes, it is a narrative. And now, look, if you go a little more deep into this, why, even if forget about President Biden's visit, if the Israeli Defense Forces deliberately targeted a hospital, they know, they're not stupid, they know that this is going to go badly for them.
Right.
So why would they deliberately do it?
Right.
But on the other hand, there is evidence, there is known evidence from another TV channel's correspondent who reported from Gaza, where there was footage of the Hamas firing rockets in close proximity, rockets which are not firecrackers,
Yes.
firing from the close proximity of schools and hospitals.
Right.
There is enough evidence of that footage of
But
that.
yeah, I mean, Hamas has been known,
Hamas
to,
has been
use
known to do this.
civilian
So they expect
facilities.
that the Israelis will retaliate
Right.
whenever the rockets were fired from homes and hospitals
Right.
and schools,
Right.
and casualties, civilian casualties will happen.
Yeah.
And so that's a beating stick which they have got.
Right.
So I don't, and if you, in answer to your first question, whether they've achieved their aim. Now everybody's going to talk about this. How many people, even among the people who will condemn this, and rightly so,
Yeah.
the number of civilian deaths, rightly so.
Right.
How many of them have actually condemned what has happened in on October 7th?
October 7th. Right.
It's just been forgotten.
You think that, Dr. Manjari, this October 7th is now on the back burner, it's probably one of the worst terror attacks of the 21st century. And now you have this hospital attack which has kind of taken away all the attention away from that.
Of course.
Do you think that that's going to make it that much more difficult now for Israel to launch its ground offensive?
Absolutely, because now if you see, it was Hamas's offensive to Israel.
Right.
Right. Now it has changed to Israel-Palestine.
Of victimhood.
Yeah,
it's
of
become
victimhood.
A
Now it is
story
all
of-
about how Palestinians are, being targeted, or how they are. Of course, there is a lot of, chaos happening in Gaza. I mean, there's a lot of displacement happening. Millions of people are being displaced. All of that is happening. That's
Right.
true. But what I'm trying to say here is that, this entire narrative, as Arjun was saying, entire narrative has changed from Hamas's offensive. Somehow we are very short-sighted in our approach, and also probably suffer from, short-term memory loss.
Right.
We forgot what happened on 7th of October.
Right.
So of course there is a, entire change of spectrum in terms of, changing the entire background, entire this thing from Hamas, Israel to now Israel, Palestine. Now everybody is going to talk about how Palestinians are being targeted by Israel. That has become the news now.
No, in fact, our reporter Neha Khanna interviewed a Palestinian lady, Hadil Kazaz, in the West Bank, and she's lost family in Gaza. Let's listen into.
To talk about how desperate and nightmarish the situation in Gaza currently is, we're now joined on News9 Live by Hadil Kazaz. She is a Palestinian woman who works with Oxfam and joins us now from the West Bank. Hadil, first and foremost, thank you very much for joining us at a very difficult time. May I begin by asking you, according to the information that you have, because you are so close to that area, how bad is the situation in Gaza? There are a lot of reports coming in that tell us that it's an absolute nightmare for the Gazans. Tell us, what is the latest you have?
The situation is something that we have never seen, not in Palestine, not in other conflicts that we are aware of. Oxfam colleagues have been working with difficult conflicts all over the world, but all of them agree that this is unforeseen, unprecedented type of situation. Not only because of everything is destroyed in Gaza, all infrastructures, roads, hospitals, schools, homes, the death toll is so high. It's higher than Ukraine war so far. It's higher than any other war that happened in recent years in across the world, around the world. Because of the dire situation and the needs for services, basic services, including water, including food, medication, any kind of basic needs are not there anymore. And people are crying for days now because they don't have access to these basic needs. Soon we will have news about deaths due to lack of water and lack of food, not only because of bombardments.
It is a terrible situation. Would it be correct to say, Hadil, that the real death toll is likely to be much higher than what is being reported, because we are told that there are many dead bodies that are lying buried under the rubble of collapsed buildings? These are bodies that have not even been counted. Is that correct?
Yes. These things we also hear, but unfortunately Oxfam had to suspend all its operations in Gaza because all our colleagues and partners are not able to move for their safety. 11 of our colleagues who work in the Gaza Strip are lost their homes or evacuated their homes, and their homes are partially or totally destroyed. Now the 33 colleagues we have in the Gaza Strip, they are not able to assess or to do any kind of humanitarian work because they themselves are in need of humanitarian assistance. So unfortunately, the news we hear that maybe the death toll will rise for thousands or hundreds, we don't know, but we cannot also verify this because we cannot operate in the region.
I understand what you're saying. Talk to us a little bit in detail about the siege, the total siege and the impact that it has had, apart from the relentless bombings, which have caused many, many, many deaths. You were talking about how people have no food, water, fuel, electricity. It's a desperate situation, no medicines. Tell us about that. How bad is it?
So this war comes to Gaza Strip, which is already a vulnerable and very poor and very highly populated region, in the occupied Palestinian territories. For 16 years before this war, the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip didn't have access to movement, freedom of movement, to travel, high unemployment rates, high poverty rates. 80% of the population of the Gaza Strip were below poverty line. So it is already a dire situation where electricity was coming to people only 4 hours. People couldn't store food because they don't have money and they don't have electricity. So the situation was already bad. 90% of Gaza water is not suitable for human consumption, even before this war. Now we add to this the challenge that the water bombs, the water network is totally destroyed because of the bombardment. We add to this the fact that the electricity was cut since October 12. If there are few pockets in the Gaza Strip which has either renewable energy like solar panels or generators, but even these are running out of electricity. So people are in total darkness, no access to clean water anymore. There is no possibility to treat even injuries. There were 10,000 injured people in a Shifa hospital alone. One of my cousins got injured because the house next to her was bombarded, and stones and rocks fell on her, and she was badly injured. She went to the Shifa hospital and was treated for first aid only and sent home. For 3 days she was in coma, and the family had to evacuate her to a safer space.
So it's very clear that it's the Palestinian civilians who are caught in the crossfire, and this is something that we've been talking of for several days now, from the day Hamas literally launched their assault on Israel, that it's the Palestinian civilians who are caught in the crossfire. Arjun, where is this all going to end?
Look, Sandeep, the problem is it goes both ways. There were many cases when some of these babies who were massacred in various ways, which I will not get into, there was somebody, there were not just one person, but a number of people said, well, there were legitimate targets. Why is a 6-month-old baby a legitimate target for the Hamas? Is because the so-called explanation, which is no explanation at all, is that they would grow up and become Israeli soldiers.
Right.
So, so civilians are to be killed because they are potential Israeli soldiers. So this is the kind of, now the same narrative, if you take it further from the other side, will become, oh, these are not innocent, these people support Hamas. So therefore they are to be, so this whole problem is getting trapped into this, as they say in Hindi, tu me me, kind of a, you did this, but you did this, but you did this, and you supported this, and this is what happened. That is the worst thing to get into. The point is there are civilians getting killed, there are absolutely innocent civilians on both sides. Let's not make this into a one-sided versus one-sided. Civilians who are getting killed. And people can be cynical about it, that this is collateral damage. I mean, that's a very bad term to use for civilian deaths, including for people who have lives. Civilians, whether in Gaza, whether in southern Israel. And how do we find an end to this or find an answer? That's impossible for, I think, anybody. People have been trying this for the last hundreds of years.
Right, but there are a lot of Arab governments who've been, actively working behind the scenes, talking to Israel, talking to all the parties involved, in fact, with Iran, and even the Chinese and the Russians have kind of waded in. But how does this really complicate matters for the Arab governments, who have to listen to their Arab street, as they call it? Does it make it that, this particular attack, does it make it that much more difficult for them to talk peace and de-escalate?
It's not easy. I will not say it becomes more difficult, but it's not easy because they have to listen whether none of them are democracies. They don't have to stand for parliamentary elections or presidential elections.
It's the least democratic region in the world.
They don't have to answer to there's going to be no referendum on whether they should continue or not. So to be cynical about it. But obviously the Gulf Arabs as well as the Saudi others have to listen to their constituencies. So there is a rumor that is circulating, not confirmed by any Saudi official, that the talks that were going on with Israel and Saudi Arabia been put on hold for the. There's no confirmation from either side, so we can't go with a certainty of that. But that is a rumor which is also spreading that, see, this can happen. And yes, the street does matter. You have to listen. It may not be an election street, election voters, but they have to matter. At the same time, if you look at the background, is that Hamas and Israel have been at loggerheads right from the time Hamas took over in 2007.
That's right.
So 2007 they took over. The first thing they did was fired rockets. Where there was no Israeli. So the so-called occupation of Gaza was not there. There was not a single Jew in that entire territory. But they withdrew in 2005. So in 2007, as soon as the Hamas took over, won the elections, last elections that they ever stood for, and they won the elections, the first thing they did was stage a coup against the Fatah, against the Palestinian Authority, threw them off buildings. We all saw the footage of that, live things happening, hanging them on cranes, etc. And then what is the next thing they did? They fired rockets at Israel. And then in 2008, there was a clash to put it politely, 2012, 2014, and I think there was one in 2017, then 21, then 22, and earlier this year in May also. So this is like a never-ending cycle. What happens in this thing is there's a rocket attack, the Israeli Air Force attacks, strikes back, then there is some ceasefire by Arab
and it's a cycle of violence.
It's a cycle.
And there's
to a large
cynically,
extent,
it's been the expression that's used for it, very cynical, of course, that it's called mowing the grass. Somebody said
that's the kind
that
of
there's a whole crop of terrorists, and then after every few years,
Look,
there is
Sandeep,
a violent.
At the end of the day, even when the Prime Minister of Israel, who's understandably, and the people of Israel are very hurt and very wounded at this time, and they are lashing out. Yes, that's understood. But and they agree that Hamas will be wiped out from Gaza, understood. But everybody knows, including the Israelis, that the Hamas leadership, which matters, is sitting in a foreign country.
Yeah, we were talking about that
In
earlier,
Qatar.
Dr. Manjari. They're all,
They're
the
all over.
leadership
They're
is
not
all
there. They're not
overseas.
in Palestine,
Hamas is not going to get eliminated.
You know, there's, since I'm from Mumbai, I must mention this thing of how, in the 90s, you had this wave of underworld violence in Mumbai. And all of this violence was being carried out by foot soldiers, where all the dons were all offshore dons. They were sitting overseas.
Correct.
And in this case, similar thing seems to be happening, that you have the Hamas leadership that's sitting abroad.
That is how it works generally with terrorists. They never come to the front.
And
they always
they
send
are
their
the
foot
control
soldiers.
centers.
Yes, they are the control centers.
Right.
So the whole question of wiping out Hamas from Gaza, possible.
Right.
Every single overhead soldier or operative of the Hamas may be killed or captured by the Israeli army. Eventually, they do a ground
That
invasion.
seems to be inevitable,
That's going to
Dr.
happen at some
Manjari.
point.
Who
But
replaces
how do you
Hamas?
stop them?
Right.
How do you stop, especially as we said, that the leadership is sitting there.
Yeah.
And this sort of thing, unfortunately, the death of all these civilians, the killing of all these civilians, whether in the hospital or outside, or the other ones that have happened in the last few days, 3-4 days, are used as propaganda, as breeding grounds to recruit more recruits into Hamas.
Yeah.
How do you change that?
Who replaces Hamas? I mean, if you assume that Hamas capability is going to be so badly degraded that it won't be a functional organization, what comes after them?
No, but like we were talking about, that the control center is in Qatar, so it can be reinvigorated, right? It can
the leadership stays and then it continues
exactly. So it can
run the organization.
Anytime.
The money comes in.
Yes,
the money,
the money comes, the support comes, the artilleries come, everything.
Right.
So everything is available. So you can just restart, if I can say that. So that is, that's what I'm saying, that very apprehensive of this military defeat of Hamas in Gaza.
So military defeat of Hamas is
it's
not
not going
likely
to. It's not going to.
You're just going to knock out the.
It will help.
If I can go back to a comparison to the 70s.
Right.
In Vietnam, for example, South Vietnam had the paramilitaries, these underground workers. North Vietnam was separate.
Right.
So there was no chance that the United States Army, the Defense Forces, could have defeated these guys.
Right.
There was no way, unless you invade North Vietnam and capture Hanoi or something like that. If that, so the similar kind of a thing.
So they are undefeatable. You're
it's
saying.
not defeatable. This is the terrorist organization. It's like LTTE to some extent.
Absolutely.
Until you go and kill the head.
Right.
And narrow them out and destroy them.
Right.
It's not going to happen.
And especially we have to understand why the leadership is in Qatar, because they know that this is what Israel will do.
Right.
They have read Israel's tactics, they have read Israel's movement, that this is what the IDF will do.
Yeah, and in fact, we're looking at the Middle East's largest humanitarian crisis since the civil war in Syria, where 6 million civilians were displaced. We've got a story on what's going through in Gaza right now, the humanitarian crisis that's unfolding there. Let's listen in.
Hamas is here to destroy us. The only choice is for us to destroy Hamas's capabilities.
The Middle East is one of the most fragile, conflict-ridden spots on earth. In recent years, civil wars in Syria, Iraq and Yemen have created millions of refugees. Now this scenario is set to repeat itself in the Gaza Strip. Over 2 million Gazans are caught in the crossfire between Israel and Hamas. Now the United Nations says that Gaza is being strangled and that the Middle East is on the verge of an abyss.
After the terror attacks, a lot of Hamas terrorists had taken shelter in a lot of buildings, they were in hideouts, and they continued to attack in at least 22 to 30 areas. So the casualty figures drastically increased. And ever since this terror attack, there's been an emotional outburst across the political establishment, but more so through the civilians, who of course want revenge, who of course want a response from Israel. Unfortunately, in these terror attacks, a lot of times, mostly, we see Hamas using the local civilian population and Muslims as the human shield in Gaza. And that's why we see high casualty numbers in which unfortunately civilians become a casualty as well.
The main aim is only to finish the Hamas network, to finish their explosive, to finish their arms and ammunition depot, because they know if they are not able to achieve that target, then it's very tough for them to eliminate everyone. Initially, they will destroy the main lifeline of Hamas, that is the tunnel services. They are the tunnel, because once they destroy all these things, then it's very easy to make them not to operate in all these northern areas. Then they will go behind the top leadership.
IDF at this stage has said that airstrikes now will be accompanied anytime now with a ground assault. They have more than 360,000 reserve troops that have been called in across Gaza, and a ground assault is almost imminent. That clearly indicates that the casualties will increase drastically, and many are comparing this with 9/11, but this is 3 times 9/11 if we compare the population of Israel and the United States. That's why the anger is much more, and the response will be even bigger. Any kind of a war or any kind of ethical response to such terror attacks, of course, cutting electricity, water or food supplies is inhuman. But what Israel says is that what the Hamas had done in south of Israel was the biggest tragedy, inhuman, and cannot be tolerated by any democracy. And that's why when Hamas has chosen not to abide by the ethics and rules of war, then Israel also will not support or join this ethics of rules of law and war, and will conduct these airstrikes and cut water, electricity, goods, trade, and any kind of humanitarian aid for Gaza.
Russia's war in Ukraine is Europe's bloodiest war since the Second World War. It's killed tens of thousands of people and seen over 6 million Ukrainians become refugees. Israel's war in Gaza could create hundreds of thousands of refugees, but there's an important difference. The Ukrainians were accepted by their neighbors, the neighboring countries, but nobody wants the Palestinians, not even their Arab neighbors who support them politically. The plight of the Palestinians, the nowhere people, is only set to get worse. That's the story of Palestinian civilians caught in the crossfire between the Israeli state and Hamas. And I have with me here our Executive Editor, National Security, Aditya Raj Kaul, who's been tracking developments very closely. Aditya, tell us what the situation is right now after this horrific hospital attack in Gaza.
Well, it's almost like a global crisis. Initially, the reports trickling in yesterday at around 9 p.m. That the event happened somewhere between 7 and 8:30 about airstrikes at the Gaza hospital. Initially, the narrative that was created all across was that it was an Israeli airstrike in which more than 500 civilians, including children, were killed. But gradually, there were video evidences that really came in and indicated that this could be a missile or a rocket that was launched by the Hamas or the Islamic Jihadis, right, and it was misfired. In fact, Al Jazeera, which has almost become a mouthpiece of the Hamas, taking its spokesperson from the Hamas time and again, was live on those visuals and indicated that there were at least a couple of rockets that came in and fell at the exact location, right, where this hospital really is. So without a fact-finding, a commission or an investigation by a neutral party, you cannot blame Israel blindly. Right. And that's why US President Biden is in Israel right now. In fact, this afternoon itself, in a joint press conference with Benjamin Netanyahu, he confirmed. He said that there are a lot of groups there, so you do not really know what's happening. Mm-hmm. A lot of people are dying. But he also said that it seems that it's not you who has done it, but it is the other team, indicating Hamas and Islamic Jihadis. So clearly, the front page newspapers all across the globe are blaming Israel today.
Yeah.
But the reality remains that for terrorists, I'm not talking about the Palestinian people, because Hamas clearly doesn't represent them. For Hamas and Islamic Jihad, it doesn't matter, because they've been using these civilians as human shields. And I'll give you a personal example, Sandeep. My family members stay in UAE, and for my niece, Arabic is a compulsory subject to study.
Yeah.
And her online tutor for Arabic stays in Gaza. And she has been trying to leave Gaza for the last 1 week. But
Right.
every time my cousin asks her that why aren't you able to leave, she says that these local people, indicating Hamas,
Yeah.
are not allowing her to leave.
Right.
So
right.
this is the humanitarian crisis,
Right.
that they are being used as human shields, as cannon fodder, and the world remains silent.
So, Arjun, going back to 2009, I mean, I'm constantly reminded of what happened in northern Sri Lanka, if you remember, when the government started moving in against the LTT.
Correct.
And the LTT kind of took the entire population of the northern areas as human shields, and they
Yes.
started moving them with them towards the coast,
Yeah.
if you recall. Do you see a similar situation unfolding here, based on what Aditya just
Well,
told
one
us?
slight difference with what happened
Yeah.
at that time is that the LTT leadership was isolated.
Right.
They had no refuge in any country.
Right, they weren't sitting in any
They
other
weren't sitting
foreign
in
country.
a foreign country.
Right, right.
Prabhakaran was right there with
Yes,
his
yes. With his
terrorists-
entire
with his entire
leadership,
leadership, so
yeah.
to say. I won't call them troops; they are terrorists.
Right.
At the end of the day, so there's a difference here with no backup. There was
Right.
no way for them to escape.
Yeah.
The difference here is that the Hamas, with the leadership, not here. What kind of leadership
Right.
is this that leaves the people of Gaza to face the brunt, which is expected? Do you think that in 7th October, when the Hamas carried out this, do you think that they didn't know what kind of retaliation will happen from the Israelis?
So they clearly
That's
knew
understood.
that, right?
And they
And which
knew-
is why they took
So
those
this is where
hostages,
it's
200
not
plus
just that.
hostages.
It's not
yeah.
just that, of course. Besides that, Israelis
Yeah.
are not stupid. They knew that hostages will be taken. There will be a. But the difference is that they neither cared for Jewish lives,
Right.
because of which the kind of massacres they carried out. Now it is said to be touching almost 2,000 civilians,
Right.
the largest number since the Holocaust in one day,
Yeah.
of number of Israeli Jewish dead. And the other side of it is that they don't even care for the lives of the Gazan citizens, so Arab civilians.
Right.
That if the retaliation happens, which has happened now with airstrikes, etc., and maybe a ground offensive later, it is the civilians who are getting killed, not the Hamas. There are one or two instances which keep happening. That so-called head of the military operations has been killed and this and that. But take the proportionality. So they don't care for lives at all, whether Jewish or their own Arab lives.
Right.
And the more that the Israeli defense forces attack, and more casualties that are caused, which happens unfortunately in the case of a war, the more propaganda it is for them, the more they think that they are getting the political capital, so to say.
Right. So, Aditya, you think this is going to postpone the ground offensive indefinitely? The fact that we are talking about, we're not talking about October 7th anymore. It's all focused. We're solely focused on the hospital attack. So, does that postpone the ground offensive?
Sandeep, it's a long war. It's a long haul. It's not going to happen within 48 hours or 72 hours. Of course, currently they're waiting for Biden to leave, and
Right.
we are expecting the French president and the UK Prime Minister also to visit sometime in the next few days, perhaps this week itself.
Right. But all the statements seem to indicate that they don't want war. They certainly don't want a ground offensive where tens of thousands of people could die.
Yesterday a statement came in from Hamas indicating that they will release all the hostages if Israel stops bombing.
Right.
That was really a kind of a messaging that
Yeah.
they are doing, a
Yeah.
narrative being set up
Right.
by Hamas that they care for humanity. Now imagine they are keeping the hostages,
Yeah.
and they're still playing this game
Right.
of being the saviors of the Gazan people.
Right,
It's
right.
hypocritical.
Yeah.
It's clearly hypocritical, and just like Arjun mentioned, I mean the entire leadership
Yeah.
of Hamas is enjoying their life in Qatar.
Right.
They have private jets, they have villas, they have huge property. I mean, Hassan Nasrallah and all others,
Yeah.
apart from Hamas, Hezbollah as well, they are probably the richest, non-state actors globally. So what are they really complaining about? Do they really care for the local civilians or children? It's more a messaging. It's more a propaganda that's being done globally, and they are desperately trying to unite the Muslim world.
Right.
Now imagine a situation where the Europeans are saying that we will accept refugees, but Egypt and Jordan categorically come out and say that we will not accept refugees.
Yeah.
In fact, the Egyptian representative says that I have a suggestion. Why don't they move to the Israeli desert till the time this war really happens? So
Right.
even the Muslim countries do not want to accept the refugees. What does Hamas and Hezbollah have to say about that?
Absolutely. No, but the big concern, and this is President Joe Biden's abiding concern, if you can call it that, is the fact that they don't want the conflict to widen. And in fact, that is why they've taken the unprecedented decision of moving not one but two carrier strike groups into the Mediterranean. There's one already there, the USS Ford, and the second one, the USS Eisenhower, which is on its way. And in fact, the carrier strike group is the ultimate expression of American power. It's the most powerful combat formation in the world. Let's look at the features of a US carrier strike group in this package. A US carrier strike group is the world's most powerful grouping of naval combat power. It comprises nuclear-powered attack submarines, surface vessels, and aircraft that can strike in all three dimensions. The key word here is strike. At the center of the carrier strike group is a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier like this one. The US has 11 such carrier strike groups, all of them centered around nuclear-powered supercarriers. Now, each supercarrier like this displaces over 100,000 tons. It's over 300 meters long. It's powered by nuclear reactors that can drive it to a speed of over 30 knots. It can carry 90 different aircraft, including fighter jets, helicopters, reconnaissance aircraft, combat aircraft. It can carry 90 such aircraft, which is almost the size of entire air forces of smaller countries. To give you an idea, one Ford class carrier like this one can carry more aircraft than Portugal has in its air force. And a strike group's aircraft can strike targets over 1,000 kilometers away. Let's look at the aircraft that a carrier strike group carries on board the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. That's the F-35C. It's a stealthy fifth-generation fighter aircraft. It has a range of over 2,000 kilometers. It carries a range of onboard weapons, missiles, and bombs. Then you have the F-A-18 Super Hornet, which is the most advanced variant of the F-18 fighter aircraft. It's an attack aircraft. It's a strike aircraft. It can carry a range of bombs and missiles. Then you have the E-2D Hawkeye, which is the eyes and ears of the fleet. It can track up to 2,000 targets out to a distance of 600 kilometers. There you see the radar on board the E-2D Hawkeye, which it flies far ahead of the fleet, captures aerial targets, surface targets. Then you have the E-18G Growler electronic aircraft, which jam enemy communications. You have MH-60R helicopters on board, which are used for multi-purpose missions. Like this one here, they can fly transport missions, they can carry anti-submarine loads, they can act as gunships and strike at surface targets. Now, the Ford class carrier, like this one here, can generate something like 160 aircraft sorties a day. And these sorties can surge up to 220 in wartime. That's a phenomenal number of aircraft sorties. The supercarrier has a flotilla of escort ships which protect it from a range of air, surface, and subsurface threats. The primary strike element, the surface strike element of a carrier battle group, is the Ticonderoga class cruiser that you see here. It has over 100 different types of missiles. These include Tomahawk land attack missiles that have ranges in excess of thousands of kilometers. They have standard Mark III surface-to-air missiles. You have the Arleigh-Burke destroyers, which carry over 90 advanced surface-to-air missiles. These create a screen around this carrier. They protect them from all kinds of threats, subsurface, aerial, and surface threats. Now, each strike group also has an amphibious assault ship like the one that you see here. This carries something like 2,000 Marines. Now, the hidden part of the strike group is the submarine arm. That each strike group has one nuclear-powered attack submarine, one or more such nuclear-powered attack submarines. Now, these could be the Los Angeles-class attack submarines or the Virginia-class submarines. They can carry a range of torpedoes, anti-ship missiles, long-range cruise missiles, formidable strike package, as you can see, striking in all the three dimensions. That's what a carrier strike group is all about. So that's how the US signals intent in any global crisis. It moves its carriers into place. Arjun, how do you see this playing out now with the Americans coming in, the entire Western world, as Aditya said, you know, there's literally a revolving door of leaders that are coming into Israel to help avert conflict. Do you think that the conflict is now on the back burner now, the land offensive, the ground offensive?
You can never tell, Sandeep. Honestly speaking, you can never tell. Look, when Aditya also spoke about casualties, and we both spoke about civilian casualties on both sides, you have to also understand that a ground offensive will also cause Israeli casualties, soldiers.
Right.
And every soldier is, you know, every citizen is important for Israel. They always take care of every civilian that they have. The other side of it is also had to make this carrier battle groups more effective. Probably they should have been sent to the Persian Gulf, to the Gulf area.
Right.
It's the only state which is so far here, which is functional, is Iran, which is involved here. Syria is literally in pieces, which Lebanon is in no condition to do anything. They are not bothered as long as Hamas keeps out of the way. That creates, whenever Hezbollah does anything, it is the Lebanese state which pays for it. The civilians who are not interested in Hamas, in Hezbollah's operations against Israel. So what is the battle group is there, two battle groups is an overkill for what they're going to face. Kind of, it is, but it is a kind of a backup to show that they are not alone, that we are there with it. What will they do with that battle group is a big question.
Well, they obviously signal to regional actors to, like Iran, to stay out of the conflict.
But when Iran is a kind of a country, they don't really pay attention to this kind of a thing.
Right.
They're not really going to be cowered down because of, and just to repeat about when you talk about non-military operations, is like things like UN sanctions. As of today, as of yesterday, the official UN sanctions on their acquisition of rockets, etc., has expired.
Right.
So as somebody on Twitter quoted once yesterday, quite an interesting quote, that as of today, the 18th, they are free to buy an ICBM from a non-state actor.
An ICBM?
I mean, that's just a way of putting it. You know,
assuming one is up for sale.
That is available if one is for sale. There's nothing illegal about buying it anymore.
Right.
The UN sanctions are over.
Right.
So unless those are reimposed and look, the clerics in Iran have got a long term going, long plan. This has happened and people have seen it. What happened in Lebanon when they took over? Lebanon was known as the Paris of the Middle East, and what was done to it after that? They are not really interested in. They have a long term plan going.
They have a long term plan.
And they don't care. They've already indicated that their former president Rafsanjani had made this statement. Or was it Amity, who made this statement? We're looking to wipe Israel from the map.
Right. Of course.
Literally, physically.
It's in fact the world's longest running covert war from 1979. Which is
funny because
Iran. It's funny, they don't share a border.
No, because Iran and Israel were the closest of partners before 1979.
When the Shah was in power.
When the Shah was in power.
Absolutely.
And they had advisors, etc., military sharing, etc., which happened. But with this kind of a thing, they are dedicated, and that's not the word I would like to use, but the leadership in Iran is particularly dedicated to the destruction of what they call little Satan, which is Israel, and the big Satan, which is the United States. The people do not agree, and there are very clear signs that the Iranian people have indicated that they do not agree with it. They're definitely not with the clerics, and that they support the Israelis in what they've gone through.
And we'll leave you with this report from the border with Sumit Chaudhary. He's been on the ground for the last couple of days. He's following the Israeli Defense Forces as they mobilize for what could be a long haul, as Aditya said, a possible ground invasion that could unfold in the next couple of days, though we don't know as of now, given this horrific hospital attack, where this trajectory will take us. But we'll leave you with that report from Sumit Chaudhary. Thanks for watching.
और इस समय एक बार फिर TV9 भारतवर्ष आपको लेकर आया है यहाँ पर फ्रंट लाइन के एरिया के अंदर, और मैं आपको दिखाने की कोशिश कर रहा हूँ कि इस समय टैंक्स और आर्टिलरी किस तरीके से तैयारी कर रही है इन इलाकों में जाने की। अगर आप देखें, ये टैंक्स है जो करीबन हैवी टैंक्स है इसके, और अभी थोड़ी देर में टैंक्स मूव किए जा रहे हैं। अगर आप देखें, सैनिक लगातार तैयारी कर रहे हैं फ्रंट लाइन पे जाने की, और ये पहली तस्वीरें TV9 भारतवर्ष आपको दिखाने की कोशिश कर रहा है और ये भी बता रहा है कि आखिरकार इस समय क्या तैयारियां यहाँ चल रही हैं।